Okay. Okay. Hello. Thanks for being here. My name is Stephen Johnson. I'm one of the organizers for TeachOSM, and I want to give everybody an introduction to OpenStreetMap. How many people in the room are OpenStreetMappers? Oh, wow, fair amount. Good, good. And any educators in the room? Whoa, awesome. This is great then. I love this. So I want to talk, a few things I want to talk about today. First of all, describe what is TeachOSM, why it exists, give some project highlights of things that we've been doing, and I hope to provide some compelling reasoning for why I think we need to use TeachOSM to teach geography, and provide a little bit of a summary, and we'll have some time for discussion as well. TeachOSM is it's designed to be a resource for educators. We cover the waterfront in terms of primary education and secondary education, but as well as vocational education as well. It's about using OpenStreetMap to teach geography. We have a lot of materials out there that help us to learn how to map. This is like, well, how can we use this OpenStreetMap tools and techniques to teach geography? And how can we provide the instructors who are using it some support for to incorporate open mapping in their classroom, and really using the OpenStreetMap platform to cultivate spatial thinking and awareness. It's a growing resource for educators. We have a website that we use, and on that website we have certain modular components and things that can be used, repurposed, and refit into lessons that have applied mapping projects, and the resources that help instructors to kind of assess student progress and quality. And I know we have a lot of materials out there, very good materials. LearnOSM is an excellent resource, and our project is a fork of what started with LearnOSM. They're fantastic tools for teaching, for the self-starter to learn how to map. So why do we need TeachOSM if we have all this other stuff? Well, we really are going to turn that on its head a little bit and say, let's use OpenStreetMap to teach geography so that we can incorporate that into the classroom and to vocational settings, as well as student clubs and things like that. We have tools that help students that interpret the landscape and train, the idea is to train young mappers to supplant the project. I don't know if anybody here recalls at a State of the Map a couple years ago, Alyssa Wright, who was now with MapZen, gave a really compelling presentation that kind of analyzed the diversity of the OpenStreetMap community, and as a result of that thinking, we decided there was a need for kind of a diversification effort within the OpenStreetMap community. TeachOSM came out of that as kind of a result. Well, how can we kind of diversify the pipeline of mappers? So by providing both the materials for educators and help for students, we've been able to kind of fill that gap and start to engage students with mapping at a younger age, so that they understand that geography is a vocational option for many of them. Plus, they can get started using OpenStreetMap with the low cost, with the minimal barrier to entry. So, what have we done so far? We've established a website. We have these repository of case studies on there. If you go to teachosm.org, you'll see some stuff there. We provide a lot of workshops for educators and students. Some of those are mapathons. Some of those are how-to hands-on sessions on how to map, but also how to create a sustainable community based around OpenStreetMap, and how to create just good projects with that. So we've also established micro-credentials that enable Geobadges. John had a brief mention of it in his previous presentation on MapStory. He had I worked with John to launch the Geo Badges. So we have some micro credentials as a as an aid to documenting service hours for service learning credit. For educators, we provide that basic how-to mapping, but we go beyond that to provide some tools for how to manage student accounts, things to organize a mapping event and hold it together, and how to assign work and how to evaluate the success of those things. For students, again, basic mapping skills and opportunities to connect with vocational learning. We are looking at a program with the Census Bureau to map vulnerable and missing areas of the United States where the data are poor. Some of the service learning opportunities, Humanitarian OpenStreetMap, MapGive, and those sorts of things. But the whole idea is to cultivate geoliteracy through these mapping projects and get people on it. Geo Badges, the micro-credentialing, we just launched last fall. We've deployed 2 badges, and I know that there's a lot of badges that get awarded just for like attending an event or things like that. The object of this is not so much to just grant, it's not like a Foursquare badge you get for showing up. This you have to kind of document some actual skill acquisition and be able to demonstrate these things through either a link to a change set or through some demonstrable means that you can demonstrate that some proficiency with the mapping skills and mapping tools. We anticipate deploying about 2 more badges within the next month or 2. I want to switch and highlight some of the projects that we've been engaged with. This one took place in 2014 in Washington. One of my colleagues is involved with a neighborhood group and caught wind of this youth ambassadors program that was doing some collection of businesses up and down Georgia Avenue in Washington, D.C. For a business improvement district. And so Andrew approached them and said, well, if you have all this data, why not map it? And they thought it was a great idea. We trained about, 15, maybe 20 mappers on how to edit OpenStreetMap, and these kids took their notebooks and they went up and down Georgia Avenue from the center of town all the way out to the edge of the district, and as a result, we got, just on one day, we have 270 new features added to the map, and the biggest kick was the kids being able to see the stuff that they did on the map, and they all thought that was really cool. It's just a kind of a satellite view of the same thing. We use the OpenStreetMap Tasking Manager to manage a lot of these, and it really helps allocate the work, and it also helps be able to assign individual students different tasks in different areas of it. But you can see the green stripe down the center for the areas that we edited for the Georgia Avenue project. Here's an interesting project that Humanitarian OpenStreetMap Team in Indonesia is conducting. They have a team of about 15 people there in Jakarta, and they have this what they call a university roadshow, and the idea of the university roadshow is to put trained OpenStreetMappers pair them with academics and researchers and professors around Indonesian universities, and thereby go out and host mapathons and train trainers in all of these different centers. And I don't know how many universities, I think it might be up to 13, 14 universities, but over the last 5 years there's been at least 95, if not 100 trainings. By the time, it's probably over 100 at this point. Been about 3,000 people trained and 2 million buildings added, and lots and lots of schools. Now, the focus of this is disaster preparedness. I don't know if you know about Indonesia. It's got a raft of geological hazards, flooding and typhoons, and there's all sorts of natural hazards. So this is being used as a low-cost method for putting OpenStreetMap into schools, getting data very quickly, and using it for rapid response for disaster planning and recovery. It's kind of a cool project. This is a project that my colleague Maggie and I participated in last, end of February, beginning of March, something like that. The tiny little nation of St. Lucia, all 175,000 people, had a national mapathon. And this was really cool because it's, with 175,000 people, you can get the whole nation behind this whole thing. But the cool thing about this was just it's a mixture of armchair mapping, and it was a mixture of foot surveys. And so a lot of us went out onto the streets of Castries and took, using field papers as our guide, printed out the field papers, pre-printed those out, and then went out to the field to record the business names and the addresses and phone numbers and websites and things like that. So we organized at the same time 4 concurrent mapathons here at universities in the United States. So between 5 concurrent mapathons, all focused on St. Lucia, we made about 48,000 edits to the map in the course of a day. It was great. We did some Mapillary, open source street view captures with it as well, so it was a wild success. The interesting thing here is, there's a national interest, but you had all of these people with a really diverse interest in what they wanted to map. Some people wanted to just get barbershops. Some people wanted to focus on their neighborhood. Some people wanted to focus on, fire and rescue or just certain facilities. So it cut thematically and it cut geographically for the way people wanted to do. No one had any expertise in this prior to us doing this. And the beauty of this was the low cost, the low barriers to entry that open source mapping tools make for these kind of events. This is a project I'm really excited about. It's a brand new effort with Youth Mappers. It's part of Mappers U, which is a kind of a consortium of different universities. And it's a consortium of, the founding ones there are Texas Tech, George Washington University, and West Virginia universities. There's probably 15 other universities who have since joined on with this, but they're really focused on mapping for humanitarian interests. That's their main thrust. GeoCenter's been a big patron for this whole thing. They are the USAID GeoCenter's been a patron for this work. They have, and they're getting a lot of data out of it, and they're able to kind of direct universities and actually, focus on different projects and everything. I think that's a brilliant example of the kind of collaboration that open source mapping enables. So you've got the federal agency that's kind of saying, here's what we need, and here's the mapping community responding, which I think is just a fantastic dialogue. By the way, this whole project originally was organized, the Humanitarian Mapping Society was an outgrowth of Richard Hinton and Nuala Cowan's work at George Washington University. They taught a course in open source mapping, and people thought, hey, this is cool, why don't we do this after school one night? And they all got to get together, pooled their money for pizzas, and hosted an event within the Spatial Analysis Lab at George Washington University, and it got to be habit forming, and people decided they'd like to do that. So they formed a society to do this, and the whole idea, kind of the notion, spread to these other universities. And now I want to shift gears now, and this is the shameless sales pitch here of my program. I want to persuade you that there are several compelling reasons we should be using OpenStreetMap in the classroom. And first, I think the cool thing about OpenStreetMap is, if you've ever done, and those of you who are OpenStreetMappers know this, if you go out onto the street and you're trying to capture features, when you walk down the street, all sorts of geographic detail pop up at you: street signs, hydrants, benches, rubbish bins, you name it. There's all sorts of things that have place, location, and everything like that. I like to think of this, if you're out in the field doing this and actually walking the streets, I like to think of this as geography at a 1-to-1 scale. And is it Kurbinski? John Marino. Who's the guy who said the map is not the territory? I don't know. I thought you might know. But anyway, I really think this is a case where the territory is the map. You are mapping at the 1-to-1 scale. But the idea is to provide students with a way to understand the landscape, read the landscape, and understand what geographic features are, and make the connection between a fire hydrant and an abstract geographic feature. Number two, I think things happen in Pittsburgh. is where it is because of the confluence of the two rivers plus iron ore plus coal, right? So they get coal. Things happen at different places because of geographic processes at work. Geography provides this kind of context for making social and historical events come alive. And I think this is, John showed some of this with in his demo with the African continents moving. You could see different colonial conquests and kingdoms rise and fall, and the other one was the troop movements, a little flash animation with the troop movements. But those sorts of things, if you start interpreting those events, and if you start looking at where things are in relation to other things, you start to begin to understand the geographic processes at work that shape the landscape. The third thing, I think this is a big one. Is everybody familiar with project-based learning? It's kind of student-driven. For those of you it's not, it's kind of student-driven inquiry into extended kind of projects. I think Mapathons, OpenStreetMap, it's a natural project-based learning experience for students. They collaborate on things that they think are significant and are able to focus on things of intrinsic value to them. So, for example, if everybody has a feature in their neighborhood. A lot of people have a favorite street tree in their neighborhood, and it has high intrinsic value to a very local area. And once you get away from that, it kind of loses significance very quickly. However, having those things on a map and being able to put those on the map puts the mapper in control about what's important on the landscape, rather than the other way around, the traditional way of map making, where the highway department decides which roads go on the map and things like that. So this is a great way to kind of give visibility to mappers, or kind of every mapper can begin to kind of put things into the map that are important to them and that they value. OpenStreetMap provides a lot of opportunities for service learning, and the connection that TeachOSM is trying to make is to get students who have service learning requirements for, say, graduation. I know like DC public schools require 100 hours of community service in order to get to graduate. So why not have people digitizing, right? Why not have people digitizing for Humanitarian OpenStreetMap or MapGive or any of these other things? There's a lot of different ways to contribute to, and get service learning hours, and it's such a perfect fit. So that's one of our work items, is to establish the means to, now that OSM US has 501c3 status, we can start to certify these certified learning accomplishments, service learning requirements. And I think the cool thing about this is that these are not, these kinds of service learning projects, they're not like dumbed down, they're not like worksheets, that some kids get in schools. This is like real thing, and I think a lot of students really crave opportunities to make genuine contributions, and they really don't want to be patronized with silly assignments. So this is a perfect way to kind of provide meaningful service learning requirements rather than just ticking the box. Self-directed learning is a big reason I like this. We've worked with kids who just go through like the map roulette example I had in the previous slide. People will go through the map roulette challenges for data, and they'll just like potato chips, and they'll start correcting deficiencies in the data one after the other. And I like that it's students can kind of direct their inquiry. They can focus on their neighborhood, or they can focus on, I just want to pick up bridges or rails or whatever, different kinds of things. This is a given. I think everybody understands this, but I put this in there because I've given similar talks where I have to drill home the point that there's nothing really special about this, and that the beauty of the project is its low cost, and which is really great because you don't need an expensive license to run it, which is often prohibitive for schools who have to pay for licenses. Just some sample ideas for some projects that I put together. I'm a big fan of conducting a street survey in your neighborhood. I think everybody who is an OpenStreetMapper should first be able to do a street survey, an effective street survey, and be able to use field papers and Mapillary to kind of record a basic, a full-featured mapping kinds of thing. There's, mapping for disasters, Open Historical Map, which is a sister project. There's lots of stuff to do with that. We had a mapathon in, I think it was GIS, is it GIS Day or GeoAWSM Week back in 2014, where we mapped food resources, anything to do with food, and so we spent the whole day devoted to food. We mapped all the farmers markets in Virginia, things like that, and started a student mapping society. How would you want to get involved? Well, we have a very low volume mailing list that we use right now. It's just a handful of people on it, but it's a way to kind of generate a little bit of a conversation. If you're interested in this, you can send an email to info@teachosm.org. I answered that, so you can do that. If you would like to contribute to this, we would love to have your case study. We would love to have your methods, your grading rubrics, things like that. We can post it up. We have a GitHub site. And I'll post it up here. And you can help us refine our materials for that. So that's, in a nutshell, that's Teach OpenStreetMap, TeachOSM. So I think we have plenty of time for questions. Yes. Good. Good. All right. Super. Questions? Yes.
Do you, so you focus mostly on like adding stuff to OpenStreetMap? Do you do anything on the kind of the consuming side, like cartography, using OpenStreetMap data for things?
Yes, I will repeat the question. The question is, are we mostly focused on adding data to OpenStreetMap vis-a-vis consuming data from OpenStreetMap? And the answer is, and making maps and things like, yeah, right. The answer is yes. We're pretty much, that is to say, it's qualified yes. We're pretty much focused on OpenStreetMap at this point, but a lot of our trainings that we've incorporated also incorporate, okay, how do we consume this downstream? How do we pull things out with Overpass Turbo? How do we use, and then put that into QGIS? How do we style it with, MapZen, Mapbox, CartoDB, or whatever? So we're pushing more into that direction. Other questions? Yes?
You showed a lot of stuff for high school and college levels.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have materials for middle school and elementary?
Yeah, we don't have materials specifically for middle school. I mean, we certainly could develop them, and I think field papers is one of the best places to start for that. And we don't really have a field papers tutorial specifically built for just learning map literacy, with middle school kids. A lot of the stuff that we do have on TeachOSM could be replicated and adjusted for middle school grade levels, though, in order to accommodate that. Now, for elementary school, that triggers a little bit different concern. There's the Childhood Online Privacy Protection Act that was passed a few years ago, and it really puts OSM and TeachOSM in an awkward position to solicit contributions from those under 13. And so to avoid scrutiny and raising alarms and flags, we don't really kind of focus on elementary school kids. However, I tell people all the time, bring your parents or bring your kids to mapathons, and if they want to bring their 7-year-old and sign them up and have them map with them, I think that's fine. I think that's great, and I have no objection to that. But it really is hard for us to focus what limited resources we have on something that might, raise alarm bells or signals. It is, but you have to sign up. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It is more about that. But anything that requires, you have to have an OpenStreetMap account. We have to get an email to sign up. And I know kids do all this already, but, so that's our official position. Yeah. Other questions? Yes?
So who's kind of involved so far? Are these like sort of professional, like full-time teachers, or is it like people who are involved in youth clubs, or like what kinds of people that this stuff is aimed at? Okay, so there's two parts to that. I think. You're saying we, like who's we?
Okay, so Maggie Colley and I are both organizers for TeachOSM. There's Mikkel Marin is also been a contributor, as well as Richard Hinton and Nuala Cowan, who teach at George Washington University. And their coursework kind of became the backbone for a lot of what we have been doing to kind of consolidate what they've been doing into TeachOSM, and then we've expanded into other realms. So it's just 5 of us right now. It's a project from the OpenStreetMap community, and we're.
It's a volunteer project, or is it?
It's a volunteer project at the moment, right? Yes, it is. Yes. Yes.
I assume y'all contact geography departments across the country looking for ways to engage the students who are studying geography around in college.
Right. So the question is, do we conduct any outreach to universities in order to recruit students to do this sort of thing? We do have a modest outreach, and it's mostly word of mouth and our mailing list and Slack channels and things like that. So it's very informal, and it's been growing kind of mostly organically. We'll probably have to address the outreach issues and what we need to do in the next 6 months and be able to kind of consolidate our outreach and the channels that we use to do that. We do have individual relations here and there, and the Youth Mappers project has been a real boon to us because it's kind of helped us to connect with this larger group of students, plus it's helped us to kind of say, okay, what kind of materials do we need to supply for them, and those sorts of things. At the high school level, it's a little bit more difficult nut to crack because high schools their curricula are very prescribed. The teachers have less latitude for assignments, and there's just the institutions tend to be more opaque and harder to decipher. So those high school is a little bit more difficult, and we have one. It really depends on having a champion teacher who wants to undertake this sort of thing.
Well, the reason I asked was, so I used to be on when it was a committee review thing, a GISP review committee, and saw lots of credits for things I never imagined even existed. Like there was a sorority that had a geography club, and that person got credit for being a member of the geography organization. Yeah, so there are credit volunteer hours required by sorority fraternities, or maybe degree, 4-year degree programs that require a certain amount of community service, and certainly a lot of universities have geography programs or GIS programs that you could tap into, and that was where I was. And they may need the volunteer hours.
Right.
Degree. And I was thinking it would be similar to the high school situation you were talking
Yes,
about.
yeah. So the comment here is that a lot of colleges and universities also have service learning requirements, and that this would fit the bill for that. So it's a natural fit for those two. Yes, next questions?
Sorry to hug.
No, please.
Have you looked at the comparable Wikipedia sort of education outreach programs? Because I know that SIOs are doing quite a lot, particularly at the college level, like setting student assignments.
A little bit, yeah. We've looked around left and right for some of these programs. GitHub has also got one in education, and it's kind of a little bit to where they're applicable. But mostly most of our kind of ideas and the kind of the approach that we've been taking comes from LearnOSM, which is Project 4. But we have incorporated and looked at those other things to see how they're doing it, mostly for organizational reasons, like how should we set this project up, and those sorts of things, and how should we steer the project, and how should we make sure it kind of, I think maybe some sort of a charter or something, where it spells it out. But we haven't gotten to that point yet. So we're still looking at different programs for that. So, any other questions? Going once, going twice. Okay, thank you very much.